Jethro Tull'Bursting Out, a double album I bought at the Arts Centre Record Fair in High Wycombe. It was originally released in 1978. I saw Jethro Tull at Hammersmith Odeon about the time that this was recorded. I was dragged there by some friends. I was not really that into Jethro Tull at the time, but I enjoyed the gig in a nostalgic kind of way. I had their album Thick as a Brick, which I have always loved, and I liked most of the albums that came before, but my favourite songs of theirs were probably the singles, like Living in the Past and Witch's Promise, neither of which are represented on this album. Though at the time punk and new wave were the thing, I had to admit that I did quite like some of the later songs, like Songs from the Wood and Never Too Old to Rock and Roll. However, I did not anticipate they would last so long, nor that I would ever again be that interested in them. I love the sound of this album, and the tracks I used to like probably sound better in this live setting. On the original studio recordings, the electric guitar sometimes sounded quite restrained. It was distorted, but not by loudness, but by technology. The overall sound of the band being like an acoustic band with a slightly out of place distorted lead. On this album, that same guitarist sounds totally unleashed, with some gutsy supercharged guitar-led instrumentals and some powerful soloing. This set of songs takes us from the blues of the early albums through the prog of Thick as a Brick, and then onto the pastoral Englishness, jigginess that was their style at the time. Ian Anderson, the songwriter and frontman, had moved on from his snaggle-toothed ragged tramp look to something more like a country gentleman. He compares the show like a music hall MC. His comments now seem quite un-PC. For someone who so obviously faked being wild, the sensible thing seemed a much better fit. He always seems to me to be a man that probably wears beige and invests wisely. However, neither image suggests someone who is such a musical genius. He is a brilliant acoustic guitarist, an amazing and astute lyricist, and a charismatic flautist with his famous standing on one leg pose that has become his logo. On this album they play some of my favourite Jethro Tull songs like Locomotive Breath, Aqualung, Songs from the Wood, Never Too Old to Rock and Roll, New Day Yesterday, and the early single Sweet Dream. It all has the advantage that parts that were made up and learnt in the studio by then had been perfected by years of performance. The version of Thick as a Brick is much shorter than the original, which took up 2 sides of an LP. They removed some of the parts, and I would have preferred probably more of those missing parts and less of the instrumental. I love the live version of Cross-Eyed Mary, which is not a track I particularly loved on the Aqualung album. On this album I even like the songs Skating Away on the Thin Ice of a New Day and Minstrel in the Gallery. These are 2 of their popular numbers, but I have never particularly liked the studio versions. This album has the obligatory extended flute solo, which would have been okay if it had not led into God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. But it was filmed at Christmas time, so I suppose we've got to let them have that one. I also tend to skip drum solos, but knowing that the drummer was the great Barrymore Barlow, I actually sat through it, and I did not hate it. The album ends with the encore, which includes the Dam Busters March, which is quite stirring for us Brits, and they were not the only band to end with the Dam Busters theme. However, the concert was recorded in Germany. Bursting Out, Jethro Tull.